an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Talents, chapters 12, 13, and 14. In these chapters, Lauren is finally subjected to the treatment that many other women had suffered. I am not excited about it. I am glad that we don't get too much of a detailed view, but I also hate the fact that she experiences this as a sharer. However, there is a glimmer of light at the end of this tunnel. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. So I want to start this off by talking about my my bad guessing, I guess. Last episode, I had said that based on something that Larkin says in her entry about how she missed a lot of this stuff that Olamina goes through, I thought that meant that it's over pretty quickly. And granted, it does wind up being over somewhat quickly. It's less than a year. But it turns out really the reason is because she was taken from home and relocated somewhere else and given to another family. And this changes a lot of the way that I see what went down here, because a great deal of these chapters are taken up by Olamina trying to decide whether or not what's happening to all of them is actually sanctioned or not. She can't, she's like, I'm pretty sure that this isn't legal, but at the same time, there is so much that has abruptly changed or that has become okay as long as we, turn the other way, that I can't even be sure these people aren't under direct orders from somebody somehow. And it turns out that while they are not sanctioned and what's happening to them is illegal, guys, what it turns out is true in this story is what we are finding out is true in life, which is to say, it's illegal if anybody decides to actually pursue it. But there are no people who have the resources to pursue this and get it the attention it needs who are willing to actually do that. So, we just watched the impeachment go down in flames because we were just, decided that not calling witnesses was totally fine. And there was no pushback to that. They just allowed, there's pushback vocally, but in terms of what anyone is willing to do and put on the line, apparently nothing. And we, there is this whole thing with the immigrants being detained at the border, and the way that they are being treated is really not supposed to be the standard that we have. But because the people who have the power are able to do this, and the people who are trying to fight against it do not have the same resources at their disposal, they can just kind of do what they want. And that's where we're at here. And what's so frustrating is that when Larkin's talking about this from her perspective as somebody from the outside who was in with a regular family as all of this was happening and didn't really understand at the time, she has the perspective of people who were living much more safely and stably out in the world and the way they see what's happening here. So really, her assessment of it all is that, yeah, it's not legal, but also a lot of people would see getting the homeless off the streets and vagrants out of the way of good God-fearing folk as a plus, because they don't see the way these people are being treated. They can pretend they don't know, And maybe they don't. I mean, it's kind of up in the air whether or not what's actually going on in these camps is common knowledge or not. She's like pretty sure that people probably know, but there's not cameras out there filming stuff the way that there are today. You know, like I think that's probably one of the biggest disconnects in these books because of when they were written. She doesn't have the ubiquitous cell phone that we now know is like what so much justice actually depends on. And still, even catching something on video is not a guarantee anything will ever be done about it. Because even with things degrading, cell phones are the thing that people will cling to. It's their means of communication. It is their means of connecting with the outside world. And I would say if somebody wrote this book today, they would include something about cell phones being confiscated, people like sneaking around trying to take video of things, and the way that is sort of treated by police. Like, I mean, for anybody's edification, I have not changed the settings on my phone, but I will tell you all about what I have learned, which is police apparently can legally use your finger to unlock a fingerprint locked phone. And they can legally use your face to unlock a facial recognition phone. They cannot legally force you to give up the password on a password protected phone. So if you are going to be in a position where you have any concern about the police abusing your privacy or trying to erase stuff from your phone, which 100% happens. This is something that a lot of people think they can just save a video to their phone. You want to live stream videos so that it is on your Facebook profile and not actually just locally saved to your phone. And that way you will be able to, you know, even if your phone is destroyed, which police have been known to do, the video is still alive and well somewhere. And because of this, this is something that a lot of people have pointed out. If you go to protests or something that you suspect might get out of hand, you're going to want to change the settings on your phone to password protected before you go, because who knows what's going to happen, and police can't get in there if it's password protected, but otherwise they can figure it out. So yeah, what's happening with Larkin is it's a very different situation than what I expected. And it's sort of silly of me because I should have seen this coming. I did when I had the podcast called The Broadcast. I had a whole episode about the stealing of Native children by the United States government. And this is something that sounds like I'm talking about the turn of the century or 200 years ago. I'm talking about like a year ago. I believe it was North Dakota. It might have been South Dakota. And they have a system in place where if you, as a social worker, CPS gets like bonuses for the number of Native children that they relocate, and they will straight up take people's kids without any sort of pretense or they don't have to create a paper trail. Parents will, the burden of proof that they have not been mistreating their children is on them. And if they turn up looking for their child, and these children will disappear from school. Like that happened with one family that I was reading about. She was waiting at the school bus stop for her kids to get off the bus, and it turned out that a CPS worker had showed up at their school and taken their kids before they were able to get home, to even get on the bus. So, you know, we look at this sort of thing as being something that is reserved for immigrants coming over the border nowadays. Like this is something that happens, but you can be a United States citizen and you can be from an already disenfranchised group and have this happen, and there is practically nothing you can do. These parents have been struggling to get custody of their children back, and in many cases, because they do not have the money for lawyers, they really, really struggle in managing to get their cases even heard, never mind being favorably, judged. So this is something that I kind of should have seen coming. I should have realized that the stealing of children and relocating them to new families was going to be one of the methods of keeping down the population that is considered trouble, that is undesirable. And it just didn't even occur to me. So I'm going to read a portion of this. In spite of my father's intentions and my mother's dreams, the place had gone on looking more like a 19th century farming village than a stepping stone toward destiny. But I wouldn't have minded. It couldn't have been as grim as where I did grow up. From the coming of Jarrett's Crusaders, my life veers away from Acorn and from my mother. The only surprising thing is that we ever met again. So the way she says that makes me think that happens a while later. It's unclear to me how long things go on in Acorn the way they have been. I guess, you know what? I said earlier that it's less than a year, but that's not true because later she talks about how there's like a missing year in her mother's writings. So I lied. It was like 3 years. Jesus Christ. It's so horrifying. But it feels like a short time in the, in the context of the story and the number of chapters it takes up. So she talks about, Larkin does, about the gas that was used and the way that it is used. And then we jump into Lauren's, one of her journal entries from 2033. And I think it's 2034 that is the year that's just missing. And we find out later that a lot of horrific stuff happened during that year. And it's possible that Lauren, she almost definitely wrote. But even when we get into her 2035 writings, she says something about how she hasn't been able to write as much as she used to and that she hasn't wanted to because she's so exhausted. So she probably did, and it's been lost, but it's just, So, okay. She says, today is like Sunday, better than Sunday. We have been given extra food and extra rest, and once services were over this morning, we were let alone. I'm thankful for that. For once, they aren't watching us. They don't want to spend their holiday guarding us or teaching us, as they put it. It's Thanksgiving, by the way. This means today I can write. On most days, by the time they let us alone, it's too dark to write, and we're exhausted. We're not permitted to speak to one another in our teacher's presence. I must find a way to write about the past few weeks, to tell what happened to us, and just tell it as though it were sane and rational. All of our children are gone. They've been given to good Christian homes. We are required to address our people as teacher. They have put our children's feet on the pathway to good, useful American citizenship here on earth and to a place in heaven when they die. We do not struggle against this. Our captors order us to kneel, to pray, to sing, to testify, and we do. I've made it clear to the others through my own behavior that we should obey. Why should anyone resist and risk torture or death? What would be the good of that? So, previous chapters I was saying that I thought probably the raping of these women would be done covertly and under the guise of something that is portrayed as godly and for their own good. And initially, that seems to be the tactic that they take. But it very quickly devolves into shameless abuse. They do not try and hide it. They don't try and justify it. They do not see these women as people, so it does not matter to them. And it's just this is really horrific. This is really hard to read. I found the last section to be much more difficult to get through in terms of knowing it was only the beginning of everything and that we were heading into a dark chapter, pun intended. So I knew that we weren't going to have a bright spot on the other end of it. But this section, even though I have to say, I didn't expect for them to get out within this next section. I thought it was going to be the section after. And once I started to realize that we were getting out, I was so relieved, and it really helped to leaven this for me, because otherwise I don't know how I could talk about this section without just losing my mind. So she continues talking about the abuses, that they use the collars for the lashings for fun, They just do it like, and this is nothing compared to the fires of hell, they tell us. Learn your lessons or you'll suffer like this for all eternity. How can they do what they do if they believe what they say? Which is always my question. And the men and women are still kept separate. All of them are not considered married because they have not been married in a Christian church by a minister. She hears one of the Crusaders talk about how they weren't married and were just fornicating like dogs before dragging Diamond off to his cabin. And afterwards, she kept crying and throwing up. She says she'll kill herself if she's pregnant. Which, yeah. I mean, yeah. I am not too proud to say that if this kind of thing happened to me, I do not guarantee I wouldn't just commit suicide. And in the end, they get out. So it, you know, would I have regretted it if I were looking down on the situation, having killed myself and seeing that they eventually get away? Maybe. But these people have to live with the kind of trauma I don't know that I would want to continue living with. So, you know. And then she says Emery Mora did commit suicide. She took revenge for what happened to her husband and for the abduction of her 2 little boys. She seduced one of the Crusaders, one of those who had moved into her own cabin. She convinced him that she was willing and eager to sleep with him. Then, sometime during the night, she cut his throat with a knife she had always kept under her mattress. Then she went to the Crusader sleeping in her daughter's room and cut his throat. After that, she lay down in her bed beside her first victim and cut her own wrists. The 3 of them were found dead the next morning. Like Gray, Emery had taken substantial revenge. And part of me is cheering this on, even as I know there's going to be retribution from this. And yeah, it is very quick to happen. First, she's talking about how, you know, Emery had her own daughters and that there is a part of her, her being Olamina, that's like, I kind of wish that she had chosen to live for her daughters. But at the same time, she really did something pretty badass in letting us all know that our captors are killable. If she hadn't been confined by her collar to that one cabin, she might have killed even more of them. But why had her collar not stopped her from killing? According to what Mark told me about his captivity, collars protected holders of control units. Was this a matter of a different kind of collar? Perhaps. We couldn't know that. None of the information we had collected and shared in the night had to do with different kinds of collars. What we had learned was that all our collars were linked together somehow in a kind of collar network. And they also think about the fact that these guys probably were still using their belts as the collar controls, and they had taken them off because they were, first of all, going to rape her, and so they were taking their clothes off. And secondly, she was a really small woman, and they weren't worried about trying to control her because they thought that they could overpower her very easily. So, you know, falling asleep is a pretty stupid move on their part. We were all lashed for what Emery did, and the men were made to watch. And this was something that just went on for hours. And poor Olamina is just like, you know, as a sharer, she is forced to experience not only her own pain, but everyone else's as well. And she wonders, like, she says, I remember wishing I could die. I remember wondering if in the end they would force us all to go the way Emery did, each of us taking a few of them with us. So that's the end of that, and then we start a new paragraph, and we hear about the new people who are being brought in and trying to adjust to newcomers who aren't necessarily a part of Earthseed and who don't necessarily understand the rules and the way that everybody is like trying to work together and protect one another. And she says that the Crusaders are making us enlarge our prisons and enlarge our cabins, which are now their homes. We're feeding livestock and cleaning the pens. And they've burned the books and the papers that prove that Bankole and Lauren owned this land. They burned all that they could find of our past. It's all ungodly trash, they say. They made us do most of the fetching and carrying, the stacking and piling of so much that we love. They watched us, their hands on their belts, all the books on paper and on disc, all the collections that our younger kids had assembled of mineral seeds, leaves, pictures, marriage licenses, tax receipts, legal papers, Bancole's deed to the land. They've only burned copies of the legal papers. I'm not sure that matters, but it's true. Since we got our first truck, we've been keeping the originals in a safe deposit box in Eureka, Bancole's idea. And we keep other copies in our various caches, along with a few books, other records, and the usual weapons, food, money, and clothing. So that's pretty dope. Good on you, Bancole, for coming up with this idea. And Lauren admits that she's been scanning her writing and Bancole's writing and hiding disc copies of them in the caches too. And at the time, she felt really like stupid and self-indulgent for doing it. But now she's so relieved that she did. That's one of those things that it is like, I can completely understand her feeling this way and just being like, God, I maybe I look paranoid, or maybe I just look like I'm a little too precious about my own shit. But, oh well, let yourself look a little too precious, because who's laughing in the end, you know? And she talks about hiding things under the floorboards to write, which is what I kind of thought she had been doing, but I wasn't sure if that's, you know, if there was a different hiding place. So much is gone. So much has been taken from us and destroyed. If only I could see Larkin and know she was alive and all right. And then she talks about the legality issue, which I was like questioning, you know, myself. Like, is this something that the government is behind, or is this an independent group of people? I don't think it's too much to assume that they have identities as ordinary law-abiding patriots. What lies have they told? Any group wealthy enough to have 7 maggots, to support at least several dozen men, and to have what seems to be an endless number of expensive callers, must be able to spread any lies it chooses to spread. Perhaps our friends outside have been told believable lies, or perhaps they've just been frightened into silence, given to know that they shouldn't ask too many questions lest they get into trouble themselves. Or maybe it's just that none of us has powerful enough friends. We're nobody, and our anonymity, far from protecting us, has made us vulnerable. We at Acorn were told we were attacked and enslaved because we were a heathen cult, but the Gammas and Sullivans aren't cultists. I've asked women from both families why they were attacked, and they don't know either. They owned land, though, and this is what I think is at the base of this. They're using, this is just tale as old as time, right? We're going to pretend that we're doing something out of a religious, like, desire to put you on the path to heaven and convert you, but really what's behind it is we want land and resources, and we are conquering really for that, and your well-being and, you know, everlasting soul are very secondary, and in fact, really, if we're being honest, not a factor at all. But we will use that as a means of justifying what we're doing here. And what she says about, like, they had tried to stay anonymous, but now it looks like the very fact that they are anonymous is what has made them vulnerable. That rings really true to me. I mean, when you don't know people, it's obvious that that's exactly true nowadays. You know, if you are a regular, ordinary person with the regular, ordinary reach of an average human being on Facebook with, like, you know, 500 or 600 friends and no celebrity connections, no social media presence beyond your personal feeds, if something happens to you, the likelihood of it being seen by people outside of your circle only goes up if what happened to you is particularly horrific, or if you are white, or if you are attractive and white, or if you are wealthy. And that's just how it is. If you are poor, unattractive, and you just disappear, it's not even like they find your mangled body. You just disappear. Nobody's going to care. They just won't. They just won't. It's just, you know. So it's interesting to see how they had tried so much to sort of stay under the radar, thinking that would help. And in fact, it kind of seems like it did the opposite. And she says that she's heard the teachers are from important families in the churches of Christian America in Eureka, Arcata, and the surrounding smaller towns. When we break free of our teachers, we will kill at least some of them. I see no way to avoid this. If they have to, and if they can, they'll kill us to stop our escape. The way they rape us, the way they lash us, the way they let some of us die, all that tells me is that they don't value our lives. Do their families know what they're doing? Do the police know? Are some of these teachers cops themselves or relatives of cops? A great many people must know that something is going on. Each shift our teachers stay with us for at least a week, then go away for a week. Where do they tell people they've been? The area must be full of people who know at least that something unusual is happening. That's why, once we've freed ourselves, I don't see how we can stay here. Too many people here will hate us, either because we've killed their men in our escape or because they won't be able to forgive us for the wrongs that they, their families, or their friends have done to us. Ooh, boy, did that sound real to me. There is nothing that keeps somebody like hating you, like guilt for something they themselves or their family has done. It is just a really toxic recipe. And yeah, that feels very real to me. And she keeps talking about how she's going to write about Bankole and like cope with what happened to him. And then kind of coming back around a few pages later and being like, yeah, I really need to do that. And finally, she's just like, I just finally found out what happened to him because, you know, I wasn't able to process his death because I didn't really understand what had happened. And what I had thought, which was that the gas had maybe killed him because he was older and maybe not as strong, isn't actually true. It turns out that the men had the collar lashing when they were first captured, inflicted on all of them as simply a means of showing who is in charge here and what can happen to you if you disobey us. And it seems as if when Bankole underwent this lashing, it triggered a major heart attack and he just like went down like a felled tree and that was it. Which is really like, that makes total sense to me and nobody seems to care. What kills Lauren in particular is knowing that Bankole and Zara, because she figures out that the gas killed Zara because Zara is so small, that both Bankole and Zara died not because they were intended to die, but simply as a side effect of these people who really could give a shit if anybody survives the other end of this. Like, they are just accidental casualties that matter not at all. And I completely understand that. Like there is a moment I'm covering Killing Eve for one of my other Spoil Me shows. And there's a point that one of the women who is an assassin goes up to this guy and she has a gun out and she's about to kill him. And he asks her, why are you killing me? And she's for hire. And she says to him, I have absolutely no idea. And then she shoots him. And when I was recording on it, I was just like, that's like probably the worst possible thing to hear when you are about to die and you ask somebody why you are about to die. There's never going to be a reason that feels like good enough. But at least if you're given any reason at all, you can cling to whether or not that was just or logical or whatever. But if somebody tells you they don't even know why, and they're just doing it because that's what they are told to do, I mean, that would fuck me right up. And this is, when I say that, it's like, obviously I'm thinking about my consciousness after I die, which I do not believe just disappears. But, I mean, how disrespectful. And that's how it seems like she is interpreting this here, is just like, they were total accidents, and there could have been calibrations changed or made like different in order to not hurt people who were too small or people who were too sick or old, but they just don't care. It does not matter to them. And she tells him about Zara and how she died, and they like have to be really careful about the way that they talk to each other because they're being watched this entire time. And eventually sort of stray away from one another after they have exchanged this information because they see one of the teachers coming toward them. So then we go to chapter 13 and we go back into Larkin's POV, where she says, from Acorn, I was taken to a re-education camp that was housed in an old maximum security prison in Del Norte County, just north of Humboldt County. And this is one of those things that, yeah, maybe this isn't legal, but they're using like federal buildings, right? So this has to be something that the government knows is going on. Nobody's taking over former maximum security prisons and unaware of what the fuck is going on. She says, because of its prison structure, it lent itself more easily than did Acorn to isolating people, not only from society, but from one another. It also provided enough room for a nursery that was completely separate from the heathen inmates who might contaminate the children. I was cared for at the Pelican Bay Nursery for several months. I know this because I was fingerprinted, footprinted, and gene printed there, which I really want to know what the fuck that means. And my records were stored at the Christian American Church of Crescent City. They were supposed to be accessible only to camp authorities, who were to prevent me from being adopted by my heathen biological parents, and to whoever did adopt me. Also, there I was given my name, Asha Vare. Asha Vare was the name of a character in a popular dream mask program. So, dream masks, it turns out, are these like virtual reality things. And they can make guided dreams, like the lucid dreaming thing kind of happen, where you're like, but you're in a game for it. And most of them, this is something that was like treated as if it were a scourge on society when it came out initially. But the dream masks pivoted and did something really smart, where they made a number of the storylines for these dream masks Christian and American, like, hero fantasy stories. Asha Vare was a tall, beautiful, Amazon-like black Christian American woman who ran around rescuing people from heathen cults, anti-Christian plots, and squatter camp pimps. I suppose someone thought that naming me after such an upright character might stifle any hereditary inclination in me toward heathenism. So I was stuck with the name, and so, by the way, were a lot of other women. Strong female characters were out of fashion in the fiction of the time. My name eventually was Asha Vare Alexander, daughter of Madison Alexander and Casey Guest Alexander. They were the middle-class black members of the Church of Christian America in Seattle. They adopted me during the Alcan War when they moved from Seattle, which had been hit by several missiles, down to Crescent City. And what I find so compelling here is the like casual nature of the way she talks about the Alcan War and Seattle being hit by missiles. It's just like, it's so matter of fact and meant to be just taken as like, well, yeah, you know, it happens, when the idea of that just feels so incredibly impossible right now. And I find it really interesting that this author has gone out of her way to, I mean, you know, most of the people who are in charge of these labor camps, who are in the government, are white people who feel very, to me, very white supremacist. But the people who left Earthseed with Mark were Hispanic. And this character that, or not this character, this woman who adopts, or this family that adopts Larkin, are black. And they are both Jarrett supporters as well. So it really feels like she has made an effort to point out that, like, there are going to be people who you would think certainly don't support this sort of thing. And they will be afraid enough and persuaded enough by religion to support a person that you would have thought was sort of unthinkable. So it says, Casey didn't really want me. I was a big, dark-skinned, solemn baby, and she didn't like my looks. She was a grim, stone-faced little thing, I heard her say later to her friends, and she was as plain as a stone. I was afraid for her, afraid that if I didn't take her, no one would. Which, just imagine hearing that as a kid, just being like, yeah, I decided to take this piece of damaged goods because I really figured that nobody else was going to want it because it was so ugly and sad looking. Like, Jesus Christ. Both Casey and Layla believed it was the duty of good Christian Americans to give homes to the many orphan children from squatter settlements. If one couldn't be an Ashaver rescuing all sorts of people, one could at least rescue one or two unfortunate children and raise them properly. 5 months after Layla introduced her daughter to me, the Alexanders adopted me. I didn't exactly become their daughter, but they meant to do their duty, to raise me properly and save me from whatever depraved existence I might have had with my biological parents. You know, this is exactly how assimilation happens with Native Americans. Depraved existence of being a heathen, if I'm adopted, this is precisely what happened. Children were stolen and given to new parents and raised in a different culture and told to forget, or not even needed to be told, but they would forget what they had grown up in because they would be taken when they were too young, or it would be just sort of beaten out of them. So we go back to one of Lauren's journal entries. And she's talking about the expansion of the community here and how many more people are being added and the way that they're needing to adjust to everything. And then she mentions how Mary Sullivan and Allie are lovers. And they are worried that Olamina, disapproves of them. And Olamina is just like, dude, I don't care. If you love each other, be good to each other. What the fuck do I care? And there's another woman who is part of things, which is really weird. Crystal Blair, who seems to be a natural bully. She hits or shoves people, takes their food or their small possessions. She amuses herself by telling lies to cause fights. She snatches things from people, sometimes making no secret of what she's doing. She doesn't want the pitiful possessions. Sometimes she makes a show of breaking them. She wants the other women to know what she can do, and that they can't stop her, and she has power and they don't. But we taught her to leave Earthseed women and our possessions alone. So we discovered by accident that all we had to do was hold her down and tug on her collar. The collar punishes her, and it punishes me and other sharers if we're stupid enough to watch her suffering, but it leaves no marks. If we use her clothing to tie and gag her, then with just occasional tugs on her collar, we can give her a hellish night. After we put her through one such night, she let us alone. She tormented other women. Tormenting people was her particular comfort. We worry about her. She's crazier than most of us and she's trouble, but she hates our teachers more than we do. She won't go to them for help. And later on, she mentions that Crystal doesn't get picked to be raped the way that a lot of the other women do. So the fact that she hates her teachers so much is, I wouldn't say surprising. She says that we don't know why. And I'm just kind of like, they're prisoners, they're captors and jailers. There doesn't really need to be any more reason than that. But most of the women feel the way they do about their captors because they are being personally abused, in addition to simply being kept captive and forced to work and tortured. So Crystal's hatred, the way, being so much more intense than a lot of these women, is kind of noteworthy. And Crystal, spoiler alert, winds up joining in on a failed rebellion and literally bites the throat out of one of the guards before she dies, which Crystal sounds like a really awful person in many ways, but I have to admit that is baller as hell. Shit. Wow. I would like to say that I would go down that way if something were to happen to me also, and I just at least take somebody down with me. Someone has put up a sign at the Logging Road Gate, Camp Christian Re-Education Facility. The Crusaders have surrounded the place with a laser wire fence, so there's no safe entry or exit except at the gate. Laser wire is made up of strands of wire so thin that they're hard to see. They slice into the flesh of the wild animals who blunder into them. And while they're adding new people, Lauren keeps trying to ask them what's going on, but most of them don't really want to talk to her. And it's just there's a real line between people who have been here a while and the new people. And it seems like the new people almost think that they can through good behavior or brown nosing, earn themselves better treatment. And they gradually realize that that's almost impossible, but they still are trying it at the beginning. So eventually she meets this guy named Day. His name is David, but he goes by Day. And he's the one who leads this like failed rebellion later. Olamina is really smart, and she fucking knows that this shit is not going to work, but he doesn't want to listen to her. So let's see. Oh, right. I haven't written about this until now. When I understood it, it scared me to death. It scared me into mewling in a corner like a terrorized 3-year-old. This place is a university of pain. Oh, right. So she says, I haven't written about this until now. This, guys, I didn't know this, but this freaked me out. So when she goes after the guard, she sees Benkole's dead body, and the guard lashes her a bunch of times in order to stop her attacking him. She basically gets lashed so hard that she loses big pieces of her memory. And she couldn't remember that Benkole was dead, and she says that Natividad and Ali had to tell her that he was dead more than once. That she woke up and didn't know what had happened to Acorn, that people had to tell her that they had been invaded and why they were sleeping where they were. She didn't know where her daughter was and why she wasn't there. So yeah, when I understood it, it scared me to death. I knew strangers could appear and steal or destroy everything and everyone I loved, but it had not occurred to me that bits of my own mind could be snatched away too. I knew I could be killed, but I had not thought that another person by pushing a small button. And she's just, I mean, yeah, that changes who you are as a human being. And that's kind of, it feels like she's sort of just realizing what I realized when I learned what these collars can do. Because apparently these collars don't do the jolt of endorphin. They only do the pain thing. But when we learned about the endorphin thing, I was like, and that combination of things can literally change who you are as a human being, because it's forcing you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise do and enjoy doing things that you wouldn't otherwise do because of the endorphin rush from it, which there is no way that doesn't have a lasting effect. There's no way that doesn't become something embedded in who you are. So that, to me, the changing of your brain and your being and your will, that was what scared me so much. And that's essentially what happens to her here, and realizing that just completely freaks us out. My brother said a collar makes you envy the dead. As bad as that sounds, it couldn't convey to me how a collar makes you hate. It teaches you whole new magnitudes of utter hatred. I knew almost nothing about hate until this thing was put around my neck. Now sometimes it's all I can do to stop myself from trying again to kill one of them and then dying the way Emery did. So punctuated throughout this is her learning about Day and what happened to him, what happened like to get him captured, yada, yada, yada. And that they, were trying to just like make it, but that the laws have been changed, and vagrancy is a particularly like serious crime nowadays that it didn't used to be. And he says 18 or 20 other men were caught. All the black ones were sent to jail. So this is like, and this is part of what I was talking about. There is a definite thread of white supremacy throughout these stories, but we are still shown how, and is it the thing that's the question for me? It feels like Larkin's family is sincere. And by Larkin's family, I mean the family that adopts her, that is Christian and is in favor of Jarrett. It feels like they truly believe what they're saying and how they support Jarrett is real. But part of me wonders if they just aren't excellent actors who can read the fucking room and realize that there is no point in trying to resist this, so we may as well do our best to show ourselves to be what they want us to be. And maybe they are just really, really good at that. I don't know. But I feel like the fact that they sincerely support him is probably more likely. So yeah, the black ones went to jail. Some were charged with violent crimes. The rest were charged with vagary, which is a far more serious crime than it once was. The vagrants were found guilty and indentured to the Church of Christian America. Day's friends were charged with felonies as a part of the first group because they were found together and one had a gun. Day was in the vagrant group. He had been indentured for work for 30 days for the church. He had already been shifted around and forced to work for more than 2 months. They lashed him when he complained that his sentence was up. At first, they said he could go free if he could prove he had a job waiting for him outside. Of course, since he was a stranger to the area, and since he had no free time to look for a job, it was impossible for him to get outside work. So, yeah, this is one of those things where you are set up to have an impossible standard for getting out, and thus cannot. And this is also something that happens today, where people are arrested and they don't go to trial for literally years, and they don't have any bail money, and they don't have anybody representing them. And so they wind up imprisoned without the ability to vote, without the ability to defend themselves for years, and sometimes die in prison. And one of the most famous examples of this was that poor kid who was put in prison for stealing a backpack and then wound up killing himself in jail because he was in there for years with no trial. A backpack. That's what it was. And that was it. And he was done. I mean, it's unbelievable. So most people don't know about the camps, Day says. He's learned from talking to other collared men that there are a few small camps like Camp Christian and at least 2 big ones, much bigger. One of the big ones is up at an abandoned prison in Del Norte County, and the other is down in Fresno County. Which I assume that the abandoned prison is the Del Norte County prison is the one that Larkin's at. People don't realize how free poor vagrants are being treated, but he's afraid that even if they did know, they wouldn't care, which sounds accurate to me. And then she talks about the war with Alaska and Canada and how things have started to really heat up there, that Jarrett is calling, that Jarrett has been calling the Alaskans traitors, but now I know Jared wanted a war, was working to get one started, but until Day told me, I hadn't realized it had begun. There have already been exchanges of missiles and a few vicious border battles. And by now, the inmates at this camp are 250 people. And this is started Olamina down the same road that Day winds up going down, where she's thinking to herself, if we could all move at the same time, 10 or 12 people per guard, we might be able to. And then she stops herself and she's like, they can level us with one fucking button. There's no way. Numbers don't really matter here. Unless the collars are disabled, we can't do anything no matter how many of us there are. Which, yeah, exactly. That's what makes these things so terrifying. So then, December 18th, 2033, now I have been raped. It happened twice, once on Monday and again yesterday. It is my Christmas gift from Christian America. I need to write about what's been happening to me. I don't want to, but I need to. To be a sharer is to feel the pleasure and the pain, the apparent pleasure and the apparent pain of other people. There have been times when I felt the pleasure of one of our teachers when he lashed someone. The first time it happened, or rather, the first time I understood what was happening, I threw up. So yeah, she says that there are men here who lash us until they have orgasms. This is something that my father, who some of you know, he was a member of the guerrillas in Colombia, and they were involved in some pretty heavy shit. And there was a man that I don't remember if it was somebody that he worked with or if it was somebody from the other side, if they were captured at one point. But I think it was somebody he worked with, and this was part of the reason that he wound up leaving and fleeing to the United States, who would torture people, and he would come in his pants when he did it. And it was just like one of the most horrifying things. And he never told me this. I found out this from my mother, who my dad probably told her once when he was drunk, because I don't think that's the sort of thing that he would tell people, like, really. And Olamina is feeling the response of these men when they do this. And it's just like one of the most horrifying mind fucks that you can imagine. Which, I mean, yeah, that is 100% the worst thing I can think of. And she says that she has decided to stink like a corpse. I have decided that I would rather get a disease from being filthy than go on attracting the attentions of these men. I will be filthy. I will stink. I will pay no attention to my hair or my clothing. I must do this or I will kill myself. Girl, that seems fair to me. Not fair, but yeah. 14. Somehow my mother endured more than a year of slavery of Camp Christian. I can only guess from her writings of 2033 and 2035 how she survived it. Her record of 2034 has been lost. She did write during 2034. I have no doubt of that. She couldn't have gone for a year without writing. I found occasional references to notes made then. No doubt by then she was writing on whatever scraps of paper she could find. The most important loss is this. There was at least one major escape attempt. The people of Acorn took no part in it, but of course suffered later with the rest of Camp Christian. It was led by the same David Turner my mother had met and liked in 2033. Okay, so I said 3 years, and she's saying just over a year. So apparently it was like they got captured towards the end of 2033, then were held throughout 2034 and escape in early 2035, if I'm not mistaken. So it's closer to the year that I thought, but it's not as short as I originally thought, nor as long as I thought after. So yeah, my best informant was a plain-spoken woman named Cody Smith, who had been arrested for vagrancy. She was one of the survivors of the rebellion, although she suffered nerve damage and eventual blindness. She was beaten and kicked, as well as electronically lashed. So this is the thing. Day thinks that they can overwhelm the guards. And Lauren is just like, no, absolutely fucking not. She asked him what the hell did, I love this part, guys. I love this. He didn't believe that she was right. He thought she was scared, but he forgave her because she was a woman. That drove her crazy. The more she tried to talk him out of it, the more determined he was to do it. Then he asked her if she was going to give him away, and she got really quiet and so mad he actually took a step back from her. She could do that. She didn't get loud when she got mad. She got real quiet. She scared people. She asked him who the hell did he think she was, and he said he was starting to not be sure. There was some bad feeling after that. She stopped talking to him and began talking to her own people. It was hard to talk, dangerous to talk. It was against the rules. People had to whisper and mutter and talk without moving their lips and not look at the people they were talking to. They got lashed if they were caught. So I'm running out of time here. I'm going to jump ahead. But Dave and his people do not succeed. 15 of them are killed. Day gets beaten so badly that by the time they hang him, people weren't even sure that he even knew what was going on because he was so fucked up. And the people who got beaten who were not killed still had to go out and work the next day despite being horribly injured. It didn't matter. And she says, the ones who couldn't walk disappeared. I don't know what happened to them. Maybe killed, maybe taken away for medical treatment. We never saw them again. Everyone else worked for 16 hours straight. They lashed you if you stopped to pee. You had to just do it on yourself and keep working. They did that for 3 days straight. Work 16 hours, dig a hole, fill it up, chop trees, make firewood, dig another hole, fill it up. A couple of people went crazy. One woman just fell down on the ground and started screaming and crying. The other one, a big man with scars all over his face, started running and screaming, running in circles. Eventually, there's this horrible thing that happens where these two girls betray the lesbians that are sleeping with one another in the cabin with everybody. And these two girls wind up getting like preferential treatment, but they don't actually like, we don't know what happens to them in the end. They're called the Faircloths, and we don't know whether or not they are saved in the end, if they are killed, what happened to them. But they wind up betraying these women, and one of them is lashed so many times that she dies. And the other kind of just mentally breaks and isn't able to even speak afterwards. And this is what causes everybody to begin to agree that maybe it's just time for them to take the risk and attempt to turn off these collars. And even if they do die, they're going to die either way in this fucking place. And it's worth the risk at this point. So then we jump to February 28th, 2035. And it turns out that all of the trees that they tried to tell these teachers that they weren't going to cut, but then were lashed and forced to cut anyway, were holding back a landslide. And this landslide buries a maggot in 3 cabins and also knocks out all of their collars. And they don't quite realize that this has happened until the sound of the landslide draws them to the window, especially Olamina. And she's like, comes all the way up to the window and leans her head out without really thinking about it. And then doesn't get the shock that she should have gotten from the collar. And when she realizes that, she goes and everybody tries them out, and she realizes that none of them are having the reaction from the collar. And they go and wake the men up and get all of them into the buildings, and they kill every single one of the teachers. It is so cathartic, guys. They strangle them, cut throats, whatever they need to do, they kill every single one of them. I was really hoping that they could steal a maggot and ride away in it. But evidently, I guess people don't know how to open them. There's no, like, there aren't keys just laying around. I don't know how these things work, but they all have to leave on foot. And they use wire cutters to cut the collars off. So, because that's the main thing. If all of a sudden power were to somehow return to the collars, they're screwed. So that's the main thing, is to get them all off as soon as they can. We stripped what we could from the cabins and took guns first. People began to leave. Several people tried to shoot their way into the single unburied maggot, but it was locked and impervious to any effort we could make. Some people just go nuts and start running towards the borders without thinking about the laser wire, and they wind up being like sliced up. And she, when they're leaving, counts about 7 of them that are dead. And let's see, I gathered what was left of the Earthseed community around me. We can't stay here. We'll have to take as much as we can carry and go. And Noriko says, our homes. I know, but they're already gone. They've been gone for a long time. She says, in order to rise from its own ashes, a phoenix first must burn. It was an apt Earthseed verse, but not a comforting one. The problem with Earthseed has always been it isn't a very comforting belief system. Which, yeah, that seems true to me. They look through all of the houses and all of the paperwork they can to try and figure out what could have happened to the children. And there is no paper trail of any kind. She thinks they feared being found out and that the lack of papers is deliberate. We searched until almost midday, then we knew we had to go too. But let's see. In particular, I wanted to go to our secret caches where we had not only the necessities, but copies of records, journals, and in 2 places the hand and footprints of some of our children. Bankole took hand and footprints of every child he delivered. He labeled them, gave a copy to the parents, and kept a copy. I had distributed these copies among 2 of our caches, the 2 only a few of us knew about. I don't know whether the prince will help us get our children back. When I let myself think about it, I have to admit I don't even know whether our children are alive. I only know I now have to get to those 2 caches. They are back in the mountains toward the sea, not toward the road. We can disappear in that country. We burned Acorn. No, we burned Camp Christian. We burned Camp Christian so that it couldn't be used as Camp Christian anymore. If Christian America still wants the land it stole from us, it will have some serious rebuilding to do. And she says, most of us had watched our homes before, but we had not been the ones to set the fires. This time, though, it's too late for the fire to be the destroyer that we remembered. The things we had created and loved had already been destroyed. This time, the fire's only cleansed. And that is the end of chapter 14. So, I've got, I think, 2 episodes left. I'm going to double check this before the end of the book. And I cannot imagine where this is going at this point, because I know we're not going to have a finale that's like resolving everything. That's impossible. I mean, this is too big a problem for anything to be fixed. But I am really curious because of the fact that this is like, we have an ending at, that I kind of had to skip over a little bit because I was running out of time. President Jarrett's war went really, really badly, and people are kind of over him, and not as supportive as they had been. So is the end of President Jarrett going to signal the end of the worst part of this history? Or, I'm not sure. So yes, let's see, the 18th and the 19th, and then, that's the end of the book. So just 2 more episodes. So I'm just really curious to see where we wind up from here. I have no idea, but we'll see. Thank you very much to Danique for commissioning this episode. I appreciate you. I also still hate you, but less now that they have escaped. And I hope you guys are enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.